Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stood at rigid attention in the briefing room at Camp Pendleton, her dress blue uniform pristine, despite the California heat that had already begun to intensify at 08:00 hours. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor where 12 seasoned Marines sat in uncomfortable silence, their eyes alternating between her and the man who had just delivered the words that would echo through the months ahead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Women can't lead Marines in combat, Colonel Frank Harrison had said, his voice carrying the authority of 23 years in the Corps and the dismissive tone of someone who believed his opinion was carved in stone. They lacked the physical presence, the tactical instinct, and the respect necessary to bring men home alive when the bullets start flying. The silence that followed was deafening. Not the comfortable quiet of professional soldiers awaiting orders, but the tense, electric stillness that precedes a storm. Sarah's jaw remained set, her green eyes fixed on a point precisely 6 inches above the colonel's head, following the military protocol that had been drilled into her since officer candidate school. But behind that disciplined facade, a fire burned that would soon reshape everything these men thought they knew about leadership, courage, and what it truly meant to serve. What Colonel Harrison didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in less than 4 months, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell would lead Alpha Company through the most dangerous mission in the regiment's recent history. She would navigate them through enemy territory that had claimed the lives of seasoned commanders, outthink adversaries who had been fighting in those mountains for decades, and employ tactics so innovative that they would later be studied at the Marine Corps War College. Most importantly, she would bring every single one of her Marines home alive, proving that leadership isn't measured by gender, but by the courage to make impossible decisions when lives hang in the balance. The briefing room at Camp Pendleton buzzed with an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with the upcoming deployment to Afghanistan. The walls were lined with photographs of distinguished Marines who had served with honor, their faces a testament to the Corps' proud history. But today, those images seemed to watch with judgment as an ancient institution grappled with change that challenged its most fundamental assumptions about warrior culture and battlefield leadership. Sarah had been assigned to Alpha Company 3 weeks earlier, replacing Captain Robert Chun, who had been wounded during a training exercise involving live ammunition. The transition was supposed to be routine, a qualified officer stepping into a leadership role vacated by circumstances beyond anyone's control. But routine had been abandoned the moment Colonel Harrison learned that Chun's replacement was a woman, and not just any woman, but one who had graduated at the top of her class from the infantry officer course. The Marines' most demanding leadership program. The 12 Marines seated before her represented some of the finest soldiers in the Corps. Gunnery Sergeant James Peterson, a career Marine with 3 combat tours and a reputation for turning raw recruits into disciplined fighters. Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, whose expertise in urban warfare had earned him commendations from senior commanders across multiple theaters. Sergeant Thomas Wilson, barely 24 but already recognized as one of the most skilled marksmen in the division. Each man had volunteered for this assignment, knowing it would involve extended combat operations in some of the most dangerous territory in Afghanistan. They had expected to serve under Captain Chun, a respected leader whose tactical brilliance had been proven in previous deployments. Instead, they found themselves assigned to a lieutenant who, despite her impressive credentials, had never led Marines in actual combat. The fact that she was a woman added another layer of complexity to an already challenging situation, creating doubts that went far beyond questions of experience or competence. Colonel Harrison's opposition to Sarah's assignment had been immediate and vocal. During the closed-door meeting where her deployment had been discussed, he had argued that placing a female officer in command of an elite infantry unit was an unnecessary risk that could compromise mission effectiveness and endanger lives. His concerns weren't entirely without precedent. The integration of women into frontline combat roles was still relatively new, and many senior officers harbored doubts about how these changes would affect unit cohesion and battlefield performance. "The enemy doesn't care about our social experiments," Harrison had told the base commander during their discussion. "They'll exploit any weakness, any hesitation, any moment of doubt. When your Marines are under fire in the mountains of Afghanistan, they need to have absolute confidence in their leadership. How can we guarantee that confidence when we're asking them to follow someone who's never been tested in the crucible of actual combat?" The base commander, Brigadier General Patricia Walsh, had listened to Harrison's concerns with the patience of someone who had heard similar arguments many times before. As one of the first women to achieve flag rank in the Marine Corps, she understood both the challenges and the opportunities that came with breaking down traditional barriers. Her response had been measured but firm. Lieutenant Mitchell had earned her position through merit, not politics, and she would be given the same opportunity to prove herself that any other officer would receive. But earning the opportunity and gaining acceptance were two entirely different challenges. The Marines of Alpha Company had served together for over a year, developing the kind of trust and camaraderie that could only be forged through shared hardship and mutual respect. They had trained together, suffered together, and learned to rely on each other in ways that transcended normal professional relationships. The sudden introduction of a new leader, especially one who represented such a dramatic departure from their expectations, created uncertainty that could prove dangerous. In combat situations, Sarah understood these dynamics better than her critics might have expected. Her path to this moment had been marked by similar challenges at every level of her military career. At the Naval Academy, she had faced instructors who questioned whether women possessed the physical strength necessary for infantry service. During officer candidate school, she had endured peers who suggested that female officers would inevitably become liabilities in combat situations. Throughout the infantry officer course, she had confronted doubts about her ability to lead Marines who might not respect her authority in life or death situations. Each challenge had been met with the same response: exceptional performance that left no room for doubt about her capabilities. She had outperformed male counterparts in physical fitness tests, exceeded standards in tactical exercises, and demonstrated leadership qualities that earned recognition from instructors who had initially been skeptical of her presence in their programs. But achievements in training environments were different from the realities of combat leadership, and everyone in the room understood that distinction. The specific mission that Alpha Company would be undertaking in Afghanistan involved establishing a forward operating base in the Kunar province, an area known for its rugged terrain and active insurgent presence. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces had been using the region as a staging area for attacks against coalition forces, and Alpha Company's assignment was to disrupt these operations through aggressive patrolling and targeted raids. The mission would require extended periods in hostile territory, complex coordination with local forces, and the kind of tactical flexibility that could only come from experienced leadership. Colonel Harrison's briefing had been thorough and professional, outlining the strategic objectives, operational constraints, and logistical requirements that would govern Alpha Company's deployment. But his closing comments had shifted from military analysis to personal opinion, revealing the deeper concerns that motivated his opposition to Sarah's assignment. The suggestion that women lacked the necessary qualities for combat leadership wasn't just a tactical assessment, it was a fundamental challenge to her right to serve in the role she had earned through years of preparation and demonstrated competence. The 12 Marines listened to this exchange with the disciplined silence expected of professional soldiers, but their expressions revealed the complexity of their own feelings about the situation. Some, like Gunnery Sergeant Peterson had served with female Marines in support roles and had developed respect for their capabilities. Others, particularly the younger Marines, had never worked closely with women in military contexts and weren't sure what to expect from this new dynamic. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had served under both excellent and inadequate commanders during his career, and he had learned to judge leaders by their actions rather than their demographics. But he also understood the unique challenges that combat leadership presented, and he wondered whether Lieutenant Mitchell truly comprehended the life-or-death decisions that would soon be placed in her hands. The Marines under her command weren't just soldiers, they were someone's sons, brothers, and fathers, and the weight of that responsibility could crush even experienced leaders. Sergeant Wilson's concerns were more practical than philosophical. He had seen what happened when units lacked cohesion or when Marines didn't trust their leadership completely. Hesitation in combat situations could be fatal, and any factor that introduced doubt into the command structure was potentially dangerous. He didn't question Lieutenant Mitchell's qualifications on paper, but he wondered how those qualifications would translate into the split-second decisions that determined who lived and who died in firefights. The younger Marines, including corporals David Johnson and Marcus Thompson, brought their own perspectives to the situation. They had grown up in a military where women's roles were expanding, but they had also been shaped by a warrior culture that emphasized physical dominance and aggressive masculinity. The idea of following a female leader into combat challenged assumptions they had never been forced to examine, creating psychological conflicts that would need to be resolved before they could function effectively as a unit. Sarah's response to Colonel Harrison's pronouncement was a masterclass in military bearing and professional restraint. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself, and didn't show any visible reaction to words that were clearly intended to undermine her authority before she had even begun to exercise it. Instead, she maintained the composed demeanor that had carried her through every previous challenge, understanding that her response in this moment would set the tone for everything that followed. "Sir, I understand your concerns," she had said, her voice steady and measured. "I look forward to proving that leadership is about competence, not gender, and that these Marines deserve a commander who will bring them home alive regardless of what others might expect." The room remained silent as the implications of her words settled over everyone present. This wasn't just about military policy or social progress. It was about the fundamental question of what makes an effective leader in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. The 12 Marines who would serve under Lieutenant Mitchell were about to discover whether their new commander possessed the qualities necessary to guide them through the challenges ahead, or whether Colonel Harrison's concerns would prove prophetic. In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, as the briefing concluded and the Marines filed out to begin their pre-deployment preparations, Sarah remained behind to study the operational maps and intelligence reports that would guide their mission. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a familiar burden, but it was accompanied by a determination that had been forged through years of proving herself in environments where failure wasn't an option. She had 4 months to transform a group of skeptical Marines into a cohesive unit that could operate effectively in one of the world's most dangerous combat zones, and she intended to succeed where others expected her to fail. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the briefing room windows as Sarah continued her preparation, knowing that the next phase of her career would either validate everything she had worked toward or confirm the doubts that had been expressed so clearly. But she also knew something that her critics didn't. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment, and she was ready to prove that true leadership transcends the limitations others try to impose. Sarah Mitchell's journey to Alpha Company had begun 8 years earlier in a small town in Montana, where her father, retired Marine Master Sergeant William Mitchell, had taught her that strength wasn't about size or gender. It was about mental toughness and the ability to make decisions under pressure. Growing up on a ranch outside Billings, she had learned to handle responsibility early, managing livestock, repairing equipment, and solving problems that would have challenged grown men. But it was her father's stories about Marine Corps leadership that had shaped her understanding of what it meant to guide others through impossible circumstances. At the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Sarah had quickly distinguished herself not just through academic excellence, but through an intuitive understanding of small unit tactics that surprised even her instructors. During her second year, she had participated in a war game exercise where midshipmen were divided into opposing forces and tasked with capturing strategic objectives across the academy grounds, while her male counterparts had focused on direct assault and overwhelming force. Sarah had developed a strategy that utilized deception, misdirection, and careful timing to achieve her objectives with minimal casualties. The exercise had lasted 3 days, and Sarah's team had been outnumbered 2-1 from the beginning. Traditional military doctrine suggested that her forces should have been quickly overwhelmed, but she had studied the terrain carefully and identified weaknesses in the enemy's deployment that could be exploited through unconventional tactics. Instead of engaging in direct confrontation, she had divided her team into small groups that moved independently, creating the illusion of a larger force while avoiding detection by superior numbers. Her approach had been methodical and patient. Rather than rushing toward objectives, she had spent the first day gathering intelligence about enemy positions and movement patterns. Her team had established observation posts that provided real-time information about opposing forces, allowing them to predict enemy actions and position themselves accordingly. When they finally moved to engage, it was with complete knowledge of their adversary's capabilities and intentions. The turning point had come during the second night, when Sarah's forces had simultaneously attacked 3 separate objectives, while making it appear that the assaults were coming from different directions. The enemy commanders had been forced to divide their attention and resources, weakening their defenses at each location. By dawn, Sarah's team had captured all their assigned objectives while suffering only minimal casualties, demonstrating tactical brilliance that impressed instructors who had been conducting similar exercises for decades. Commander Patricia Kane, the officer responsible for evaluating the exercise, had been particularly struck by Sarah's ability to maintain unit cohesion while executing complex maneuvers under stress. Most midshipmen try to win through aggression, she had noted in her after-action report. Midshipman Mitchell understood that victory often comes through intelligence, patience, and the ability to think several moves ahead of your opponent. These are the qualities that separate competent officers from exceptional leaders. The success at the Naval Academy had led to Sarah's selection for the infantry officer course at Quantico, where she would face the most demanding leadership training the Marine Corps had to offer. The program was designed to push candidates beyond their physical and mental limits, testing their ability to make sound decisions while exhausted, stressed, and operating with incomplete information. Of the 43 officers who had begun the course with Sarah, only 28 had successfully completed it, and she had finished ranked 3rd overall. The infantry officer course had introduced Sarah to the complexities of modern combat leadership, including the psychological challenges of commanding Marines in life-or-death situations. One exercise had particularly tested her ability to maintain unit effectiveness while dealing with casualty situations. Her platoon had been tasked with clearing a series of buildings held by opposing forces, but the scenario had been designed to create multiple wounded Marines who required immediate medical attention while the mission continued. Sarah's solution had demonstrated both tactical innovation and deep understanding of human psychology. Rather than allowing wounded Marines to demoralize her remaining forces, she had integrated casualty care into her assault plan, using wounded Marines as sources of intelligence about enemy positions while simultaneously ensuring they received appropriate medical attention. Her approach had maintained unit effectiveness while addressing humanitarian concerns, earning recognition from instructors who had rarely seen such sophisticated thinking from junior officers. Psychological evaluation that was part of the K. Infantry Officer course had revealed qualities that would prove crucial in her future leadership role. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the Marine Corps psychologist who had conducted Sarah's assessment, had noted her exceptional ability to remain calm under extreme stress, her talent for reading the emotional state of subordinates, and her skill at maintaining unit morale during extended operations. Lieutenant Mitchell possesses the emotional intelligence necessary to lead Marines through the most challenging circumstances, Dr. Walsh had written. She understands that combat leadership requires not just tactical competence, but the ability to inspire confidence and maintain cohesion when everything else is falling apart. Following her success at Quantico, Sarah had been assigned to the 3rd Marine Division in Hawaii, where she had served as a platoon leader in Bravo Company under Captain Stephen Martinez. Martinez had been initially skeptical about having a female officer in his unit, but Sarah's performance during training exercises had quickly earned his respect and confidence. She had demonstrated an ability to connect with Marines from diverse backgrounds, understanding their individual strengths and weaknesses while molding them into an effective fighting unit. During her time in Hawaii, Sarah had participated in joint training exercises with Special Operations Forces, where she had been exposed to advanced tactics and technologies that most infantry officers never encountered. She had learned about close-quarters combat techniques, advanced communication systems, and the kind of small unit operations that would prove invaluable in Afghanistan. More importantly, she had worked with operators who judged her solely on her performance rather than her gender, providing her with confidence that would carry her through future challenges. One training exercise had involved a simulated hostage rescue mission where Sarah's platoon had been tasked with infiltrating a compound held by enemy forces. The scenario had been designed to test decision-making under extreme time pressure, with intelligence suggesting that hostages would be executed if the assault wasn't completed within a specific time frame. Sarah had developed a plan that utilized multiple entry points and coordinated movements to overwhelm the defenders while minimizing risk to both her Marines and the hostages. The execution had been flawless, with Sarah's forces achieving complete surprise and neutralizing all enemy positions within minutes. But the exercise had also presented her with an unexpected challenge when one of her Marines had been wounded during the assault and required immediate evacuation. Rather than abandoning the mission or leaving the Marine behind, Sarah had adapted her plan in real time, using the wounded Marine's position as a base of fire while continuing the assault with reduced forces. The after-action review had been overwhelmingly positive, with Special Operations instructors praising Sarah's ability to maintain tactical flexibility while adapting to changing circumstances. Most officers become rigid when their initial plan encounters problems, had noted Chief Warrant Officer Robert Thompson, a veteran of multiple combat deployments. Lieutenant Mitchell showed the kind of adaptive thinking that separates good leaders from great ones. She understood that the mission comes first, but she also demonstrated genuine concern for her Marines' welfare. Sarah's reputation within the 3rd Marine Division had been built on consistent performance across multiple training scenarios. She had led her platoon through desert warfare exercises in California, jungle operations in the Philippines, and urban combat training in various locations across the Pacific. Each environment had presented unique challenges, but Sarah had consistently demonstrated the ability to analyze terrain, understand enemy capabilities, and develop tactics that maximize her unit's effectiveness while minimizing casualties. Approach to leadership had been based on thorough preparation and clear communication. Before every exercise, Sarah had conducted detailed briefings that ensured every Marine understood not just their individual role, but how their actions contributed to the overall mission. She had established protocols for dealing with various contingencies, from equipment failures to casualty situations, that allowed her unit to maintain effectiveness even when circumstances changed rapidly. The Marines under Sarah's command had initially been uncertain about serving under a female officer, but her competence and dedication had quickly won their respect. Lance Corporal Anthony Davis, a machine gunner in her platoon, had later commented that Lieutenant Mitchell knew more about tactics than most captains I've worked with. She never asked us to do anything she wouldn't do herself, and she always had a plan for whatever situation we encountered. Sarah's technical expertise had been particularly evident during a complex training exercise that had simulated a multi-day operation in enemy territory. Her platoon had been required to move through hostile terrain, establish observation posts, and conduct reconnaissance missions while avoiding detection by opposing forces. The exercise had tested not just tactical skills, but the kind of mental endurance and decision-making ability that would be crucial in actual combat situations. Throughout the exercise, Sarah had maintained detailed logs of enemy movements, terrain, features, and weather conditions that might affect future operations. Her analysis had revealed patterns in enemy behavior that allowed her platoon to predict their movements and avoid detection while gathering valuable intelligence. When the time came to conduct offensive operations, Sarah's forces possessed complete situational awareness that enabled them to achieve their objectives with minimal risk. The success of the exercise had been recognized at the division level, with Sarah receiving a commendation for exceptional leadership and tactical innovation. But more importantly, it had demonstrated to her Marines that she possessed the knowledge and skills necessary to guide them through dangerous situations. The trust that had developed between Sarah and her platoon had been based on proven competence, rather than abstract qualifications. Captain Martinez had recognized Sarah's potential and had recommended her for advanced training opportunities that would prepare her for company-level command. She had attended the Marine Corps Command and Staff College, where she had studied the history of small unit operations and analyzed case studies of successful and unsuccessful leadership in combat situations. The academic work had provided her with a theoretical framework for understanding the challenges she would face as a company commander. During her time at the Staff College, Sarah had written a thesis on adaptive leadership and asymmetric warfare environments, examining how successful commanders had modified their tactics when facing unconventional opponents. Her research had focused on historical examples where traditional military doctrine had proven inadequate, requiring leaders to develop innovative solutions based on local conditions and enemy capabilities. The thesis had been well received by faculty members who had recognized her ability to synthesize complex information into practical leadership principles. The combination of academic study and practical experience had prepared Sarah for the challenges she would face in Afghanistan, though she understood that no amount of training could fully simulate the psychological pressure of making life-or-death decisions in actual combat. Her father's advice had been simple but profound. The best leaders are the ones who care more about their Marines than they do about their own careers. When you're willing to sacrifice everything for the people under your command, they'll follow you anywhere. As Sarah prepared to assume command of Alpha Company, she carried with her not just the technical knowledge and tactical skills she had acquired through years of training, but also the confidence that came from consistently proving herself in challenging environments. She understood that her Marines would judge her not by her gender or her academic achievements, but by her ability to make the decisions that would bring them home alive. That knowledge would prove invaluable in the months ahead, when theoretical leadership principles would be tested in the crucible of combat operations in one of the world's most dangerous regions. The operations center at Bagram Airfield hummed with the controlled chaos of a major military hub, its banks of computer screens displaying real-time intelligence feeds from across Afghanistan. Colonel Marcus Brennan, the task force commander, stood before a massive digital map that showed the rugged terrain of Kunar Province in stark detail. Red icons marked known enemy positions, while blue symbols indicated coalition forces scattered across the mountainous region. The mission he was about to assign would test every assumption about leadership, tactics, and survival in one of the world's most unforgiving combat environments. "The situation in the Peck Valley has become untenable," Colonel Brennan announced. To the assembled company commanders, his voice carrying the weight of decisions that would determine the fate of hundreds of Marines. "Intelligence indicates that insurgent forces have established a sophisticated network of training camps and weapons caches in the area. They've been using the terrain to their advantage, conducting hit-and-run attacks against our forces, and then disappearing into caves and mountain passes that we can't effectively monitor." Sarah studied the topographical display with the analytical precision that had become her trademark. The valley stretched for nearly 40 miles through some of the most challenging terrain in Afghanistan, with peaks rising over 10,000 feet and deep gorges that created natural choke points where ambushes could be devastatingly effective. The few roads that existed were little more than goat paths, unsuitable for heavy vehicles and easily blocked by determined defenders. Any force operating in this environment would be essentially isolated, dependent on helicopter resupply and vulnerable to weather conditions that could ground aircraft for days at a time. The intelligence briefing that followed painted a picture of an enemy that had adapted to American tactics with disturbing effectiveness. Major Catherine Rivers, the task force intelligence officer, displayed satellite imagery showing carefully camouflaged positions that had been constructed over months of preparation. "The insurgents have learned to exploit our reliance on technology," she explained, pointing to areas where traditional surveillance methods had proven ineffective. "They move at night, use natural cover to avoid detection, and have established communication networks that don't rely on electronic systems we can intercept." The enemy's tactical evolution had been driven by years of experience fighting coalition forces. They had learned to anticipate helicopter landing zones, to position weapons where they could engage aircraft during the most vulnerable moments of approach and departure. Their knowledge of local terrain was encyclopedic, allowing them to move through areas where American forces would need maps and GPS systems. Most troubling, they had demonstrated an ability to coordinate attacks across multiple locations, suggesting a level of organization that exceeded previous intelligence estimates. "The strategic objective is clear," Colonel Brennan continued, his finger tracing a route through the valley on the digital display. "We need to establish a permanent presence in the Peck Valley that can disrupt enemy operations and provide a base for extended operations throughout the region. The mission will require a company-sized force capable of independent operations for up to 6 months, with minimal logistical support and maximum tactical flexibility." Sarah's mind raced through the implications of what she was hearing. A 6-month deployment in isolated terrain meant that her Marines would be cut off from the normal support systems that American forces typically relied upon. Medical evacuation would be complicated by weather and enemy action. Resupply would be irregular and dangerous. Communication with higher headquarters would be limited by the mountainous terrain that blocked radio signals. Every decision would have to be made with the understanding that help might be days away. The mission parameters were unlike anything she had encountered during her training or previous deployments. Traditional military doctrine called for overwhelming force supported by air power, artillery, and rapid reinforcement when situations became critical. But the Peck Valley assignment would require her to operate more like a special operations unit, using small numbers of highly skilled Marines to achieve objectives that would normally require much larger forces. Major Rivers continued her briefing with specific intelligence about enemy capabilities in the target area. "We've identified at least 3 major training facilities and multiple weapons storage sites. The insurgents have also established a sophisticated early warning system that allows them to track our movements and prepare defensive positions before we arrive. Previous attempts to clear the area have failed because conventional tactics allowed the enemy to predict our actions and prepare accordingly. The failures of previous operations had been studied extensively by military analysts who were trying to understand why traditional approaches had proven ineffective. 2 separate company-sized operations had been conducted in the valley during the past year, both commanded by experienced officers with proven track records. The first had ended when insurgent forces had used improvised explosive devices and coordinated ambushes to inflict casualties that forced an early withdrawal. The second had achieved some tactical success, but had been unable to establish a permanent presence due to logistical challenges and continuous enemy harassment. Colonel Brennan's tone became more serious as he outlined the specific challenges that the next operation would face. The enemy has learned to exploit our standard operating procedures. They know how we establish perimeters, how we conduct patrols, and how we respond to contact. Any force operating in the valley will need to develop new tactics that can't be anticipated or countered by conventional defensive measures. Sarah raised her hand, a gesture that drew immediate attention from everyone in the room. Sir, what about the approach route? Previous operations have used helicopter insertion at predetermined landing zones, but that makes us predictable. What if we considered alternative insertion methods that could give us tactical surprise? Her question revealed the kind of analytical thinking that had distinguished her throughout her career. While other officers were focused on the operational details, Sarah was already thinking about how to solve the fundamental problem of achieving surprise against an enemy that had proven adept at preparation and early warning. Colonel Brennan paused, studying the map before responding. What did you have in mind, Lieutenant? The enemy expects us to arrive by helicopter at established landing zones, Sarah explained, moving to the map display. But what if we inserted at night, using multiple small teams that approached from different directions? We could establish a presence in the valley before the enemy realizes we're there, giving us time to set up defensive positions and begin operations from a position of strength rather than fighting our way in. The suggestion demonstrated tactical innovation that impressed the other officers present. Captain Bradley Harrison, commander of Bravo Company, had been considering a more conventional approach that would have followed established doctrine. That's a significant risk, he noted. If something goes wrong during insertion, we could have small teams scattered across hostile territory with no immediate support available. Sarah's response revealed her understanding of both the risks and the potential advantages of unconventional tactics. Every approach involves risk, but the enemy has proven that they can counter our conventional methods. If we continue to use predictable tactics, we'll get predictable results. Sometimes the biggest risk is doing what the enemy expects us to do. The discussion that followed revealed the complexity of planning operations in an environment where traditional military advantages had been neutralized by determined opponents. Colonel Brennan encouraged debate among his commanders, understanding that the best tactical decisions often emerged from the exchange of different perspectives and experiences. Major Rivers provided additional intelligence that supported Sarah's unconventional approach. The enemy's early warning system is most effective along the main valley approaches where they expect us to operate. Their surveillance is less comprehensive in the higher elevations and the secondary valleys that branch off from the main route. A multi-directional insertion might indeed achieve the surprise we need. The logistical implications of Sarah's proposal were significant. Instead of concentrating forces at a single landing zone, the operation would require coordinating multiple helicopter flights to different locations under cover of darkness. Each insertion team would need to carry sufficient supplies to sustain independent operations until they could link up with other elements. Communication between scattered teams would be complicated by terrain, and the need to maintain radio silence during the initial phases. Captain Harrison voiced the concerns that many officers felt about deviating from proven procedures. The Infantry Officer Course teaches us to mass our forces and maintain unit integrity. What you're suggesting goes against fundamental principles of small unit tactics. Sarah's response demonstrated her ability to think beyond traditional doctrine. When circumstances demanded innovation, the Infantry Officer Course also teaches us to adapt to terrain and enemy capabilities. Every principle of warfare has exceptions, and this might be one of those situations where conventional wisdom doesn't apply. The debate continued for over an hour, with each commander contributing insights based on their experience and understanding of the tactical situation. Colonel Brennan listened carefully to all perspectives, recognizing that the decision would have profound implications for the success of the mission and the lives of the Marines who would execute it. Finally, Colonel Brennan made his decision. Lieutenant Mitchell, you'll command the Peck Valley operation. Your unconventional approach shows the kind of thinking we need to break the cycle of tactical stalemate. But I want you to understand that this mission will test every skill you've developed as a leader. You'll be operating with minimal support in an environment where mistakes can be fatal. The assignment was both an opportunity and a tremendous responsibility. Sarah would be commanding not just Alpha Company, but also additional specialists and support personnel that would bring her total force to nearly 200 Marines. The mission would require her to establish a forward operating base, conduct offensive operations against enemy positions, and maintain security in an area where previous commanders had failed. The planning phase that followed would consume the next 3 weeks as Sarah worked with her staff to develop detailed contingency plans for every aspect of the operation. Intelligence specialists provided updates on enemy capabilities and movements. Logistics officers calculated supply requirements and planned resupply operations. Communications experts designed systems that could function in the challenging terrain of the Peck Valley. But the most critical element of the planning process was the integration of her Marines into a cohesive unit capable of executing complex operations under extreme conditions. Sarah knew that technical competence would be meaningless without the trust and confidence of the men who would follow her into one of the most dangerous environments in the world. The pre-deployment training that followed was unlike anything her Marines had experienced. Sarah pushed them through scenarios that simulated the conditions they would face in Afghanistan, testing their ability to operate independently while maintaining unit cohesion. The exercises revealed both strengths and weaknesses that would need to be addressed before the deployment began. As the departure date approached, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility that came with commanding Marines in combat operations. Every decision she made would have consequences that extended far beyond tactical success or failure. The families of her Marines were depending on her judgment to bring their loved ones home safely, and she understood that this responsibility transcended rank, gender, or institutional politics. The final briefing before deployment took place in a secure facility where Sarah outlined her tactical plan to the assembled Marines of Alpha Company. The presentation revealed months of careful preparation and demonstrated her understanding of the challenges they would face together. But more importantly, it showed her Marines that their commander had developed a plan that maximized their chances of success while minimizing the risks that had defeated previous operations. The mission that lay ahead would test every assumption about leadership, tactics, and survival in modern warfare. Sarah knew that the coming months would determine not just the success of the operation, but the future of her career and the lives of the Marines who had been placed under her command. The challenge was unprecedented, but so was her preparation for meeting it. The first indication that something was terribly wrong came at 0347 hours on a moonless night in the Peck Valley, when Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio with barely controlled urgency. "Actually, this is Bravo Team. We have multiple casualties and are under heavy fire from positions that weren't supposed to exist. The enemy knew we were coming. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she processed the implications of Rodriguez's transmission. Bravo team had been inserted 12 hours earlier at Landing Zone Echo, a site that intelligence had assured her was clear of enemy surveillance. The team's mission was to establish an observation post on the northern ridge that would provide overwatch for the main insertion planned for the following night. Instead, they had walked directly into a carefully prepared ambush that suggested the enemy possessed far more sophisticated intelligence capabilities than anyone had anticipated. Tactical situation was unraveling with devastating speed. Charlie team, inserted simultaneously at a location 3 miles to the east, had gone completely silent after reporting movement in their area. Delta team's helicopter had been forced to abort its insertion when the aircraft came under fire from multiple directions, leaving 8 Marines circling overhead in a damaged aircraft while enemy forces repositioned to engage them again. The carefully coordinated plan that Sarah had spent weeks developing was collapsing in real time, and Marines were dying because of intelligence failures that had placed them in impossible situations. "Bravo team, this is actual," Sarah responded, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her. "What's your situation, and do you need an immediate extraction?" But even as she asked the question, she knew that extraction might not be possible. The enemy had clearly prepared for this operation, positioning forces to interdict helicopter movements and trap American forces in predetermined kill zones. Rodriguez's reply confirmed her worst fears. "Actually, we've got 2 KIA and 4 wounded. The enemy has interlocking fields of fire from positions we can't see. They're using the terrain to stay hidden while they systematically destroy our position. We need immediate fire support, or we're not going to make it out of here." The forward operating base that Sarah had established at the mouth of the valley erupted into controlled chaos as her staff worked to coordinate support for the embattled teams. Captain Jennifer Walsh, her operations officer, was attempting to reach Charlie team while simultaneously coordinating with aviation assets that were struggling to operate in the confined terrain. Major Robert Chun, the intelligence officer who had assured her that the insertion sites were secure, was frantically reviewing his reports while trying to understand how the enemy had anticipated their movements so precisely. "Ma'am, we're getting conflicting reports from all sectors," Captain Walsh reported, her usually calm demeanor cracking under the pressure of managing multiple crisis situations simultaneously. "The enemy appears to be using coordinated attacks to prevent us from reinforcing any single position. Every time we try to send support to one team, they engage our helicopters from positions that force us to abort or risk losing aircraft." Sarah studied the tactical display that showed the scattered positions of her Marines across the valley. The multi-directional insertion plan that had seemed so innovative during the planning phase was now working against her, creating multiple isolated battles that she couldn't coordinate effectively. The enemy had turned her tactical innovation into a strategic disaster by forcing her to fight on their terms rather than hers. Communication breakdown was becoming as dangerous as the enemy fire. The mountainous terrain that had complicated the initial insertion was now blocking radio signals between scattered teams, forcing Sarah to rely on helicopter relays that were themselves under attack. Critical information was being lost or delayed, preventing her from developing an accurate understanding of the tactical situation or coordinating effective responses to the multiple crises unfolding simultaneously. Major Chun's intelligence briefing from 6 hours earlier now seemed like a document from another war. "Ma'am, our initial assessment was completely wrong," he admitted, his voice hollow with the realization that his mistakes had contributed to the casualties they were now suffering. "The enemy has observation posts throughout the valley that we never detected. They've been watching our preparations and positioning forces to counter exactly the tactics we plan to use. The failure of American intelligence capabilities was total and systematic. Satellite imagery had failed to detect enemy positions that were now revealing themselves through devastating, effective fire. Electronic surveillance had missed communication networks that were allowing insurgent forces to coordinate attacks across multiple locations. Human intelligence sources had either been compromised or had deliberately provided false information that led American forces into carefully prepared traps. Sarah's radio crackled again, this time with the voice of Gunnery Sergeant Peterson, whose Alpha team had been scheduled for insertion at dawn. Actual, we're observing the insertion sites from our overwatch position. The enemy has repositioned heavy weapons to engage helicopters during landing operations. All primary and alternate landing zones are compromised. We need to abort the main insertion or we're going to lose aircraft and personnel. The collapse of the insertion plan meant that Sarah's carefully calculated force structure was falling apart. Instead of 200 Marines operating as a coordinated unit, she now had scattered teams fighting for survival while the bulk of her forces remained trapped at the forward operating base, unable to reinforce their comrades due to enemy air defenses that had appeared overnight. Captain Walsh's attempts to coordinate air support were met with frustration and delay. Ma'am, close air support is being denied due to the proximity of friendly forces and the lack of positive target identification. The enemy is using our own rules of engagement against us by staying close to our positions and operating from areas where we can't distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. The enemy's tactical sophistication was becoming apparent through their systematic exploitation of American weaknesses. They had studied coalition tactics, learned to anticipate American responses, and developed countermeasures that neutralized technological advantages. More troubling, they had demonstrated an understanding of American decision-making processes that allowed them to manipulate the flow of battle by forcing American commanders to make reactive rather than proactive choices. Sarah's communication with higher headquarters was becoming increasingly strained as Colonel Brennan demanded explanations for the tactical disaster that was unfolding. Mitchell, what's your assessment of the situation? We're showing multiple casualty reports and requests for support that we can't provide due to enemy air defenses. How did your intelligence preparation miss such extensive enemy preparations? The question highlighted the fundamental flaw in the operational planning that had led to the current crisis. American forces had planned their operation based on intelligence that assumed enemy capabilities and intentions, but the enemy had been conducting their own intelligence operations that provided them with superior information about American plans and capabilities. The result was a tactical situation where the enemy held all the advantages while American forces struggled to adapt to circumstances they hadn't anticipated. Rodriguez's voice cut through the radio chatter with increasing desperation. Actual, we're running low on ammunition and the wounded need immediate medical attention. The enemy is moving to cut off our escape routes. If we don't get reinforcements soon, we're going to be overrun. The tactical mathematics were becoming impossible to ignore. Sarah's scattered teams were facing an enemy that outnumbered them, held superior positions, and possessed intimate knowledge of the terrain. The multi-directional insertion that was supposed to provide tactical surprise had instead created multiple isolated battles that the enemy could win through superior numbers and positioning. Captain Walsh's coordination efforts were hampered by the communication failures that were preventing effective command and control. Ma'am, we're losing contact with multiple teams due to terrain masking and possible enemy jamming. The tactical picture is becoming increasingly unclear, and we're having difficulty coordinating support for units that are under immediate threat. The enemy's electronic warfare capabilities were proving more sophisticated than intelligence had predicted. They were using selective jamming to disrupt American communications while maintaining their own command and control systems. The result was a fog of war that prevented American commanders from understanding the tactical situation, while enemy forces operated with near-perfect coordination. Major Chun's continuing analysis was revealing the depth of the intelligence failure that had led to the current disaster. Ma'am, the enemy appears to have been conducting surveillance of our forward operating base for weeks. They knew our insertion plans, our communication procedures, and our tactical preferences. This wasn't a chance encounter, it was a carefully planned ambush that used our own tactics against us. The psychological impact of the tactical failure was becoming evident among Sarah's staff officers. These were experienced Marines who had planned and executed complex operations throughout their careers, but they were now facing an enemy that had demonstrated superior preparation and tactical understanding. The confidence that had characterized their planning sessions was being replaced by doubt and uncertainty that threatened to paralyze decision-making at the most critical moment. Sarah's attempts to coordinate helicopter support were met with increasing resistance from aviation commanders, who were reluctant to risk aircraft in an environment where the enemy had demonstrated sophisticated air defense capabilities. Ma'am, we've got aircraft circling overhead, but the pilots are reporting multiple missile launches and heavy machine gun fire from positions that we can't identify or suppress. They're requesting permission to withdraw until we can neutralize the air defense threat. The tactical situation was becoming a textbook example of how superior enemy preparation could neutralize American technological advantages. The enemy had used their knowledge of American tactics to create a battlefield where American forces couldn't use their preferred methods of operation. Instead of fighting the kind of high-technology warfare that American forces excelled at, they were being forced to engage in close-quarters combat, where enemy advantages in numbers and terrain, knowledge were decisive. Charlie Team's silence was becoming more ominous as hours passed without any communication from their position. Intelligence analysis suggested that they had been overrun or captured, but the uncertainty was almost worse than confirmed casualties. Sarah was facing the possibility that 8 Marines had been killed or captured because of tactical decisions that she had made based on flawed intelligence and overconfidence in American capabilities. The enemy's use of psychological warfare was becoming evident through their tactical choices. They were allowing some American communications to get through, while blocking others, creating confusion and uncertainty that was more demoralizing than complete communication blackout would have been. Their selective engagement of American positions was designed to create maximum psychological impact while conserving their own resources for sustained operations. As dawn approached, Sarah faced the terrible reality that her innovative tactical plan had become a disaster of unprecedented proportions. The Marines she had been assigned to lead were scattered across hostile territory, fighting for survival against an enemy that had demonstrated superior preparation and tactical understanding. The mission that was supposed to establish American dominance in the Peck Valley had instead provided the enemy with their most significant tactical victory in months. The weight of command responsibility was settling on her shoulders like a crushing burden as she realized that conventional military solutions were inadequate for the situation her Marines now faced. The enemy had learned to exploit American weaknesses while neutralizing American strengths, creating a tactical environment where traditional leadership methods might not be sufficient to prevent catastrophic losses. The radio crackled one final time with Rodriguez's voice, now barely audible through static and interference. "Actually, this is Bravo Team. We're being overrun. Tell our families we did our best." The transmission ended in static, leaving Sarah to confront the possibility that her tactical innovations had led to the deaths of Marines who had trusted her judgment and leadership. The silence in the command post stretched for 17 seconds after Rodriguez's final transmission, 17 seconds that felt like hours as Sarah stared at the radio handset, willing it to crackle back to life, with some indication that Bravo Team had survived the assault. Around her, The faces of her staff officers reflected the same hollow realization that was settling in her own chest. The conventional military response system had failed catastrophically, and Marines were dying while bureaucratic protocols prevented. Decisive action. Colonel Brennan's voice cut through the static-filled silence with the cold authority of someone who had never been forced to watch his tactical plans disintegrate in real time. Mitchell, you will maintain current positions and await reinforcement. Do not, repeat, do not attempt unauthorized rescue operations. We're coordinating with division headquarters to develop a comprehensive response that addresses the full scope of this tactical situation. Sarah's grip tightened on the radio handset as she processed the implications of Brennan's order. A comprehensive response meant committees, planning sessions, and the kind of deliberate decision-making process that could take hours or days to implement. Meanwhile, her Marines were fighting for their lives in isolated positions where minutes could determine the difference between survival and death. The institutional machinery that was supposed to support combat operations was instead becoming an obstacle to saving lives. Sir, with respect, we have Marines in immediate contact who need support now, Sarah replied, her voice carefully controlled despite the frustration building inside her. Every minute we delay increases the probability of additional casualties. I have a plan that can extract our people using available assets, but it requires immediate execution. The plan that had been forming in Sarah's mind since the first distress calls was unconventional by any standard military doctrine. Instead of waiting for conventional reinforcement, she proposed to use the very isolation that had become their tactical weakness as a strategic advantage. The enemy had positioned themselves to counter traditional American responses, but they might not be prepared for the kind of aggressive, small unit tactics that Sarah had studied during her special operations training. Colonel Brennan's response was immediate and inflexible. Negative. You will not risk additional personnel or assets without proper authorization. The enemy has demonstrated capabilities that exceed our intelligence estimates, and we cannot afford to compound our losses through hasty decisions. Maintain your current position and await further instructions. The institutional paralysis that Sarah was witnessing had deep roots in a military culture that prioritized procedural compliance over tactical innovation. Senior commanders who had never experienced the immediate pressure of combat decision-making were applying peacetime administrative procedures to wartime crises that demanded immediate action. The result was a command structure that was psychologically incapable of adapting to rapidly changing circumstances. Captain Walsh approached Sarah with an intelligence update that made the situation even more desperate. Ma'am, we're intercepting enemy communications that suggest they're moving to consolidate their positions around our scattered teams. They're not just trying to hold ground, they're actively hunting our people. If we don't act soon, we're going to lose everyone who's still out there. The enemy's tactical evolution was becoming clear through their communication patterns and movement signatures. They had learned to exploit American decision-making processes by creating situations where conventional military responses were either impossible or inadequate. By forcing American commanders to choose between following established procedures and taking decisive action, they had created a psychological battlefield where institutional inertia became a tactical weapon. Sarah's internal struggle was intensifying as she weighed the competing demands of military discipline against her moral obligation to the Marines under her command. The oath she had taken as an officer emphasized loyalty to the Constitution and the protection of American lives, but the military justice system could destroy her career for disobeying direct orders, regardless of the circumstances that motivated her actions. Major Chun's continuing analysis was revealing the full scope of the intelligence failure that had led to the current crisis. Ma'am, the enemy appears to have been conducting extensive preparation for this exact scenario. They've studied our tactics, learned our communication procedures, and positioned forces to counter every response we're likely to make. This wasn't just an ambush, it was a comprehensive trap designed to exploit our institutional weaknesses. The psychological dimensions of the enemy's strategy were becoming apparent through their systematic exploitation of American cultural assumptions about warfare. They understood that American military doctrine emphasized technological solutions and overwhelming force, so they had created a tactical environment where these advantages were neutralized. More importantly, they had correctly predicted that American commanders would become paralyzed by institutional procedures when faced with situations that demanded immediate improvisation. Sarah's radio crackled with another transmission from Gunnery Sergeant Peterson, whose overwatch position had allowed him to observe the tactical situation developing across the valley. Actually, I'm observing enemy movement toward Charlie Team's last known position. They're moving in squad-sized elements with heavy weapons. If Charlie Team is still alive, they're about to be overrun. The tactical intelligence that Peterson was providing confirmed Sarah's worst fears about the enemy's capabilities and intentions. They weren't just defending prepared positions. They were conducting offensive operations designed to eliminate American forces before reinforcement could arrive. The conventional military response that Colonel Brennan was demanding would take hours to organize, time that the Marines trapped in the valley didn't have. Sarah's decision-making process was being complicated by the knowledge that her personal reputation and career were at stake. She had worked for years to prove herself in a military culture that questioned women's capabilities in combat leadership roles. A single act of insubordination could destroy everything she had achieved and confirm the prejudices of those who had opposed her assignment to combat command, but the alternative was accepting the deaths of Marines who had trusted her leadership and followed her orders into the tactical disaster that was now unfolding. The weight of command responsibility was forcing her to confront the fundamental question of what military service actually meant when institutional procedures conflicted with moral imperatives. Captain Walsh's voice interrupted her internal struggle with another urgent report. "Ma'am, we're losing communication with all forward elements. The enemy appears to be using systematic jamming to prevent coordination between our scattered teams. If we're going to act, it has to be now before we lose the ability to coordinate any kind of response." The communication breakdown was eliminating the last vestiges of conventional command and control that might have justified waiting for authorization from higher headquarters. Sarah was being forced to make tactical decisions based on incomplete information while operating under direct orders that prohibited the kind of aggressive action that might save lives. Her father's voice echoed in her memory from conversations they had shared during her childhood about the nature of military service and moral courage. The hardest decisions a leader makes are the ones where following orders conflicts with doing what's right. That's when you find out what kind of person you really are and what your service actually means. The tactical plan that Sarah had been developing since the crisis began was based on her analysis of enemy capabilities and weaknesses rather than conventional military doctrine. The enemy had prepared for traditional American responses, but they might not be ready for the kind of rapid, small-unit infiltration that could reach the trapped Marines before they were overrun. Sarah's approach would require her to personally lead a rescue force composed of volunteers from her remaining Marines. The operation would violate every principle of sound military leadership by placing the commanding officer at extreme personal risk, but it was the only way to demonstrate the kind of leadership that would inspire her Marines to follow her into an impossible situation. The moral mathematics of her decision were becoming clear as she calculated the probable outcomes of different courses of action. Following orders meant accepting the likely deaths of Marines who were depending on her leadership. Disobeying orders meant risking court-martial proceedings that could end her career and potentially result in imprisonment. But the choice between personal safety and the lives of her Marines was no choice at all. Major Chun's final intelligence assessment provided the tactical information that would guide her decision. "Ma'am, the enemy has positioned their forces to counter conventional reinforcement, but they may not be prepared for infiltration through the secondary ridge systems. If we move fast and use unconventional routes, we might be able to reach our people before the enemy can reposition to counter our movement." Sarah's understanding of the terrain and enemy capabilities was based on months of preparation and analysis that had prepared her for exactly this kind of tactical challenge. The enemy had studied American doctrine, but they might not have anticipated the kind of innovative leadership that was willing to abandon conventional procedures in favor of desperate improvisation. The decision that Sarah was facing would define not just her career, but her understanding of what military service actually meant in situations where institutional procedures conflicted with moral imperatives. The Marines who had been placed under her command deserved leadership that prioritized their lives over bureaucratic compliance, even when that leadership required personal sacrifice. Captain Walsh's voice carried a tone of quiet understanding as she approached Sarah with the final piece of information that would influence her decision. "Ma'am, I've got 12 volunteers who are ready to move immediately. They understand the risks, and they're willing to follow you anywhere. The question is whether you're willing to lead them." The volunteers who had stepped forward represented the best of what the Marine Corps could produce: professional soldiers who understood that their oath of service transcended institutional politics and bureaucratic procedures. They were willing to risk their lives to save their fellow Marines, but they needed leadership that would guide them through the tactical challenges ahead. Sarah's hand moved to her radio handset as she prepared to make the transmission that would either save lives or destroy her career. The institutional machinery that was supposed to support combat operations had failed, leaving her with only her training, her judgment, and the moral courage to act when action was required rather than authorized. "All stations, this is actual," she transmitted, her voice carrying the calm authority that had been developed through years of preparation for exactly this moment. "I'm initiating emergency rescue operations for isolated personnel. All personnel not directly involved in base security will prepare for immediate movement. We're bringing our people home." The silence that followed her transmission was different from the paralysis that had characterized the previous hours. This was the focused quiet of professional Marines preparing for a mission that would test every skill they had developed and every assumption they had made about leadership, courage, and the true meaning of military service. Sarah's decision to act against direct orders was based on her understanding that true leadership required the courage to make impossible choices when lives were at stake. The institutional consequences of her actions would be determined later, but the moral imperative to save the Marines under her command demanded immediate action, regardless of personal cost. The tactical situation that lay ahead would test every assumption about leadership, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice personal interests for the welfare of subordinates. Sarah had made her choice, and now she would discover whether her training, her judgment, and her moral courage were sufficient to bring her Marines home alive. The 13 Marines who followed Sarah into the darkness of the Peck Valley moved with the silent precision of predators, each step calculated to avoid detection by an enemy that had already proven their ability to anticipate American movements. Sarah led from the front, her night vision goggles revealing a landscape that seemed designed by nature to favor defenders over attackers. The route she had chosen followed a series of interconnected ridgelines that would keep them above the valley floor where the enemy expected American forces to operate. The first challenge came within 30 minutes of leaving the forward operating base, when the lead scout, Corporal Daniel Brooks, raised his fist in the signal for immediate halt. Through her night vision, Sarah could see the thermal signature of what appeared to be an enemy patrol moving along a parallel ridge. APPROXIMATEL, 400 meters to their north. The patrol consisted of 6 armed figures who were clearly conducting systematic searches of the terrain that American forces would most likely use for movement. Sarah's tactical training had taught her that the enemy's patrol pattern revealed both their strengths and their weaknesses. They were conducting thorough searches of the obvious routes, but their systematic approach also made them predictable. By timing their own movement to coincide with the patrol's schedule, Sarah's team could use the enemy's thoroughness against them, moving through areas that had already been cleared while the patrol continued their search pattern. The infiltration technique that Sarah employed was based on principles she had learned during her special operations training, but adapted for the specific terrain enemy capabilities they were facing. Instead of avoiding all enemy contact, she used the enemy's own movements to mask her team's approach, timing their advance to coincide with periods when enemy attention was focused elsewhere. Lance Corporal Maria Santos, the team's communication specialist, had established a relay system that allowed them to maintain contact with the forward operating base while minimizing their electronic signature. The system used burst transmissions and frequency hopping to prevent enemy forces from detecting their communications or determining their location through electronic surveillance. The first objective was reaching the high ground overlooking Bravo team's last known position, a rocky outcropping that would provide both observation and potential fire support for any rescue operation. The approach required crossing 3 separate ridge systems while avoiding detection by enemy forces that had demonstrated sophisticated surveillance capabilities. Sarah's navigation was proving to be exceptional under the extreme conditions they were facing. The terrain was more challenging than any training exercise had prepared them for, with loose rock that could create noise, steep gradients that tested physical endurance, and weather conditions that reduced visibility, even with night vision equipment. But her preparation had included detailed study of topographic maps and satellite imagery that allowed her to anticipate these challenges and plan accordingly. The second major obstacle came when Sergeant Kevin Murphy, the team's explosive ordnance specialist, detected signs of improvised explosive devices along their planned route. The enemy had apparently mined the approaches to their positions, creating additional barriers to American forces attempting to reach trapped Marines. Sarah's response demonstrated the kind of adaptive thinking that separated exceptional leaders from competent ones. Instead of attempting to clear the mines or find alternative routes around them, Sarah decided to use the minefield as a tactical advantage. The enemy had positioned the explosives to channel American forces into predetermined kill zones, but the same obstacles that threatened her team could also provide concealment from enemy observation. By moving parallel to the minefield rather than through it, Sarah's team could use the terrain features that had been modified by enemy engineers to mask their approach. The technique required precise navigation and constant awareness of their position relative to known hazards, but it allowed them to move through areas where the enemy wouldn't expect American forces to operate. The psychological effect on her Marines was significant. They were seeing their commander turn enemy obstacles into tactical advantages through innovative thinking and superior preparation. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Collins, the team's medical specialist, had been monitoring radio communications from the trapped Marines and had developed a preliminary assessment of their medical needs. The intelligence she was gathering suggested that multiple Marines were wounded and would require immediate treatment once they could be reached. Her planning included contingencies for treating casualties under fire while simultaneously conducting evacuation operations. The third phase of the infiltration brought them to within 200 meters of Bravo team's position, where the tactical situation became significantly more complex. Through her night vision scope, Sarah could observe enemy positions that had been carefully camouflaged during daylight hours, but were now revealed by the thermal signatures of their occupants. The enemy had established a complete perimeter around the American position, with interlocking fields of fire that would make any conventional rescue attempt suicidal. Sarah's tactical analysis revealed that the enemy had made a critical error in their positioning. They had focused their defensive preparations on countering conventional American approaches, but they had not adequately secured the high ground that overlooked their own positions. The ridge system that Sarah's team had used for their approach actually provided tactical advantages that could be exploited through careful planning and precise execution. The rescue plan that Sarah developed was based on her understanding of both enemy capabilities and the psychological principles that governed combat behavior. The enemy expected American forces to attempt direct assault or to call for conventional fire support. Instead, Sarah planned to use precision rifle fire from multiple positions to create the illusion of a much larger force while simultaneously disrupting enemy command and control. Corporal Brooks, whose marksmanship skills had earned him recognition throughout the battalion, was positioned to engage enemy personnel who appeared to be leaders or communication specialists. His role was not to inflict maximum casualties, but to create confusion and force the enemy to respond to threats they couldn't accurately assess or locate. Lance Corporal Thomas Rivera, the team's automatic weapons specialist, was positioned to provide suppressive fire that would prevent enemy forces from maneuvering effectively, while the actual rescue operation was conducted. His machine gun would create noise and muzzle flashes that would draw enemy attention away from the actual rescue team. The coordination required for the rescue operation was more complex than anything Sarah had attempted during her training or previous deployments. Each element of her team had to execute their assigned tasks with perfect timing, while adapting to changing circumstances that couldn't be predicted or controlled. The margin for error was essentially zero. Any mistake could result in the deaths of both the rescue team and the Marines they were attempting to save. Sarah's personal role in the operation was the most dangerous of all. While her team provided distraction and suppressive fire, she would infiltrate the enemy perimeter and physically extract the wounded Marines from their defensive position. The task required her to move through terrain that was under enemy observation, while carrying wounded personnel who might not be able to assist in their own evacuation. The execution began at precisely 0247 hours, when Corporal Brooks engaged the first target with a single shot that eliminated what appeared to be an enemy commander. The psychological impact of the sniper fire was immediate and dramatic. Enemy forces began responding to threats they couldn't locate while their command structure struggled to coordinate defensive measures. The enemy's response revealed both their strengths and their weaknesses as a fighting force. They were disciplined and well-trained, but they were also inflexible in their tactical thinking. Their response to the sniper fire followed predictable patterns that Sarah had studied during her intelligence preparation, allowing her to anticipate their movements and exploit the gaps in their defensive perimeter. Lance Corporal Rivera's suppressive fire created the audio signature of a much larger force, causing enemy commanders to believe they were facing a conventional assault rather than a small team rescue operation. The psychological effect was enhanced by the careful timing of the fire, which created the impression of coordinated movement by multiple elements operating from different directions. Sarah's infiltration of the enemy perimeter was a masterclass in small unit tactics and individual skill. She moved through terrain that challenged her physical conditioning while maintaining the situational awareness necessary to avoid detection by enemy forces who were actively searching for American personnel. The combination of physical and mental demands was extraordinary, but her preparation had been specifically designed to prepare her for exactly these conditions. The first contact with Bravo Team came when Sarah reached Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who was barely conscious due to blood loss from multiple wounds. His condition was more serious than radio communications had indicated, and Sarah realized that extracting him would require medical treatment that could only be provided while under enemy fire. "Lieutenant, I can't believe you're here," Rodriguez whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of enemy fire that was now focused on the areas where Sarah's team was providing distraction. "We thought we were going to die out here." Half the team is wounded, and we're almost out of ammunition. Sarah's medical training allowed her to quickly assess the condition of the wounded Marines and determine the order of evacuation that would maximize their chances of survival. The most seriously wounded would be evacuated first, but the process would require multiple trips through enemy-controlled terrain, while maintaining the tactical deception that was keeping the enemy focused on the wrong targets. The evacuation process was complicated by the physical demands of carrying wounded Marines through terrain that challenged even unloaded personnel. Sarah's physical conditioning was being tested to its absolute limits, but her determination was fueled by the knowledge that every minute of delay increased the probability of additional casualties. The enemy's growing awareness of the rescue operation was evident through their changing fire patterns and movement signatures. They were beginning to understand that they were facing a small team rather than a conventional assault, and their response was becoming more focused and systematic. Sarah's window of opportunity was closing rapidly, forcing her to accelerate the evacuation schedule while maintaining the tactical deception that was keeping her team alive. The final phase of the rescue operation required Sarah to extract the last 2 wounded Marines while her team conducted a fighting withdrawal that would prevent enemy forces from pursuing them during the evacuation. The coordination required was extraordinary, with each element of her team performing multiple tasks simultaneously while adapting to rapidly changing tactical circumstances. By 0430 hours, all members of Bravo team had been successfully extracted from the enemy perimeter and were being evacuated to medical facilities where their wounds could be properly treated. The rescue operation had been completed without additional casualties, demonstrating the kind of tactical innovation and personal courage that defined exceptional military leadership. As Sarah's team began their withdrawal to the forward operating base, she could hear enemy forces reorganizing and attempting to pursue them. But the same terrain features that had complicated the rescue operation now provided advantages for the evacuation, allowing her team to move through areas where enemy forces couldn't effectively engage them. The success of the rescue operation had proven that unconventional tactics and innovative leadership could overcome seemingly impossible tactical situations. Sarah had demonstrated that the courage to act when action was required, combined with superior preparation and tactical skill, could achieve results that conventional military doctrine suggested were impossible. The Marines she had rescued would live to fight another day, and the Marines who had volunteered to follow her into the darkness had witnessed leadership that would inspire them throughout their military careers. The operation had been successful beyond any reasonable expectation, but Sarah knew that the real test of her leadership would come when she faced the institutional consequences of her decision to disobey direct orders in order to save lives. The medical evacuation helicopter that carried the wounded Marines from Bravo team had barely disappeared into the dawn sky when Colonel Brennan's voice crackled over the radio with the cold fury of a senior officer whose authority had been directly challenged. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you will report to my headquarters immediately upon your return to base. Your unauthorized operation has created a diplomatic incident and violated direct orders. You are relieved of command pending a full investigation." Sarah stood in the forward operating base's communication center, surrounded by Marines who had witnessed her successful rescue operation, but who now watched in stunned silence as their commander faced the institutional consequences of saving lives. The contrast between the tactical success they had achieved and the administrative punishment being imposed revealed the fundamental disconnect between battlefield realities and bureaucratic procedures that had plagued military operations for generations. The investigation that followed consumed the next 72 hours, as a team of officers from division headquarters conducted interviews with every Marine who had participated in the rescue operation. The questioning revealed the institutional bias that had motivated the Inquiry investigators seemed more interested in documenting violations of protocol than in understanding the tactical innovations that had made the rescue possible. Major Patricia Vaughn, the investigating officer assigned to document Sarah's actions, had arrived at the forward operating base with preconceived notions about female officers and their fitness for combat command. Her questioning revealed assumptions that Sarah's decision to disobey orders had been motivated by emotional instability rather than tactical judgment. Lieutenant Mitchell, would you describe your emotional state during the period when you decided to violate Colonel Brennan's direct orders? Sarah's response demonstrated the same composure that had carried her through the rescue operation. Ma'am, my emotional state was focused and determined. I had Marines in immediate danger who needed rescue, and the institutional response was inadequate to address the tactical situation. My decision was based on tactical analysis and moral responsibility, not emotional factors. The investigation revealed that several senior officers had already reached conclusions about Sarah's actions before examining the evidence or interviewing the participants. Colonel Harrison, who had originally opposed Sarah's assignment to combat command, had submitted a written statement arguing that the rescue operation proved that female officers were too emotionally unstable for battlefield leadership. The lieutenant's violation of direct orders demonstrates the kind of insubordination that becomes inevitable when women are placed in positions of authority they're not psychologically equipped to handle. But the investigation also revealed perspectives that challenged the institutional narrative about Sarah's actions. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been rescued from the enemy perimeter during Sarah's operation, provided testimony that contradicted the official characterization of her decision-making. Lieutenant Mitchell saved my life and the lives of 7 other Marines through the most professional and courageous leadership I've witnessed in 12 years of military service. Her actions were tactically sound, morally correct, and executed with precision that demonstrated superior training and judgment. The Marines who had volunteered to follow Sarah into the enemy-controlled territory provided similar testimony on her leadership during the rescue operation. Corporal Brooks, whose marksmanship had been crucial to the mission's success, testified that Sarah's tactical plan had been more sophisticated than many operations he had participated in during previous deployments. The lieutenant understood the enemy's capabilities and weaknesses better than anyone else in the unit. Her plan worked because it was based on superior intelligence analysis and innovative tactical thinking. The medical personnel who had treated the rescued Marines provided evidence that contradicted the institutional narrative about the necessity of Sarah's actions. Captain Elizabeth Thompson, the battalion surgeon, testified that several of the wounded Marines would have died without immediate medical evacuation. The lieutenant's decision to conduct the rescue operation was medically justified by the condition of the casualties. Waiting for conventional authorization would have resulted in preventable deaths. The investigation took an unexpected turn when intelligence analysts provided evidence that Sarah's tactical innovations had achieved strategic objectives that conventional operations had failed to accomplish. The rescue operation had not only saved lives but had also disrupted enemy operations in ways that exceeded the original mission parameters. Major Chun, whose intelligence failures had contributed to the initial tactical disaster, was forced to acknowledge that Sarah's actions had provided valuable intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions. The enemy's response to the rescue operation had revealed defensive weaknesses that could be exploited in future operations. Their reaction patterns, communication procedures, and tactical adjustments had been observed and analyzed by intelligence specialists who recognized the strategic value of the information that Sarah's team had gathered. The rescue operation had inadvertently become an intelligence collection mission that provided insights into enemy capabilities that had been unavailable through conventional surveillance methods. The diplomatic implications of Sarah's actions were more complex than Colonel Brennan had initially suggested. The successful rescue operation had been observed by local tribal leaders who had been monitoring American military capabilities and resolve. The demonstration of American willingness to risk additional personnel to save trapped Marines had enhanced the coalition's reputation among populations that had previously questioned American commitment to their own forces. Colonel Brennan's characterization of Sarah's actions as creating a diplomatic incident was challenged by embassy officials who had been monitoring local reactions to the rescue operation. The political officer assigned to assess the regional impact reported that the operation had actually improved local perceptions of American military professionalism and dedication to protecting their own personnel. The investigation's findings were complicated by the emergence of evidence that previous operations in the Peck Valley had failed due to the same institutional inflexibility that had initially prevented Sarah's rescue mission. Two separate after-action reports from earlier operations had identified the need for more aggressive and innovative tactics, but recommendations for procedural changes had been ignored by senior commanders who were reluctant to deviate from established doctrine. The psychological evaluation that was conducted as part of the investigation revealed that Sarah's decision-making had been based on rational analysis rather than emotional factors. Dr. Rachel Morrison, the military psychologist who conducted the assessment, found that Sarah's actions had been consistent with the leadership principles taught at the most advanced military training institutions. Lieutenant Mitchell's decision to disobey orders was based on a calculated assessment of tactical necessities and moral imperatives. Her actions demonstrate the kind of adaptive leadership that military doctrine identifies as essential for success in complex operational environments. The investigation's most damaging revelation concerned the institutional failures that had created the tactical crisis requiring Sarah's intervention. The intelligence failures that had led to the initial ambush were traced to systematic problems in the collection and analysis of enemy capabilities. The communication failures that had prevented conventional rescue operations were attributed to inadequate planning and resource allocation by senior commanders, who had not properly prepared for the operational environment. Colonel Brennan's own role in the tactical disaster was scrutinized by investigators who discovered that his rigid adherence to conventional procedures had contributed to the casualties that Sarah's rescue operation had prevented. His refusal to authorize immediate rescue operations had been based on bureaucratic concerns rather than tactical analysis, revealing a command philosophy that prioritized institutional compliance over mission effectiveness. The testimony provided by the Marines who had been rescued during Sarah's operation was particularly damaging to the institutional narrative about her actions. Their accounts of the tactical situation, the enemy's capabilities, and the necessity of immediate action contradicted the official characterization of her decision as unnecessary insubordination. Their vivid descriptions of the life or death circumstances that had motivated her actions made it impossible to dismiss her conduct as mere protocol violation. The investigation's findings were submitted to General Patricia Walsh, the division commander who had originally supported Sarah's assignment to Combat Command. General Walsh's review of the evidence led to conclusions that contradicted the assumptions that had motivated the investigation. Her analysis of the tactical situation, the rescue operation's execution, and the strategic implications of Sarah's actions resulted in a dramatically different assessment of the incident. The formal hearing that was conducted to determine Sarah's fate took place in a conference room at division headquarters, where she faced a panel of senior officers who had been tasked with evaluating her actions. The proceedings revealed the institutional tensions that had been created by her successful challenge to conventional military doctrine and established command procedures. General Walsh's opening statement set the tone for the hearing by acknowledging the complexity of the situation that Sarah had faced. Lieutenant Mitchell was confronted with a tactical crisis that required immediate action to prevent the loss of American lives. Her decision to disobey direct orders must be evaluated in the context of the circumstances that made conventional responses inadequate. The presentation of evidence during the hearing revealed that Sarah's actions had been consistent with the highest traditions of military leadership. Her tactical innovations, personal courage, and dedication to the welfare of her Marines had resulted in a successful operation that saved lives while achieving strategic objectives that conventional methods had failed to accomplish. The hearing's most dramatic moment came when Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, still recovering from wounds sustained during the initial ambush, testified about Sarah's leadership during the rescue operation. His description of her tactical competence, personal courage, and moral authority provided a vivid contrast to the institutional narrative that had characterized her actions as insubordination. Lieutenant Mitchell demonstrated the kind of leadership that Marines are willing to follow anywhere. Her actions saved lives and proved that true military leadership sometimes requires the courage to do what's right rather than what's authorized. The panel's deliberations consumed 3 days, during which the members struggled to reconcile institutional requirements with the tactical and moral imperatives that had motivated Sarah's actions. The final decision reflected the complexity of evaluating leadership in situations where conventional procedures had proven inadequate. General Walsh's announcement of the panel's findings was delivered with the formal precision that characterized important military decisions. Lieutenant Mitchell's actions violated direct orders, but they were motivated by tactical necessity and moral imperative. Her rescue operation demonstrated exceptional leadership and tactical innovation that saved American lives while achieving strategic objectives. The panel finds that her conduct, while technically insubordinate, was consistent with the highest traditions of military service. The consequences of the hearing were far-reaching and unexpected. Instead of facing court-martial proceedings, Sarah was promoted to captain and assigned to a staff position where her tactical innovations could be studied and incorporated into military doctrine. Her rescue operation was analyzed by military educators who recognized its value as a case study in adaptive leadership and tactical innovation. The broader implications of Sarah's actions extended beyond her personal career to influence military policies about female officers in combat roles. Her successful leadership under extreme conditions had demonstrated that gender was irrelevant to tactical competence and moral courage. The institutional resistance that had initially opposed her assignment to combat command was gradually replaced by recognition that military effectiveness required the best possible leadership regardless of demographic characteristics. The Marines who had served under Sarah's command requested reassignment to her new unit, demonstrating the loyalty and confidence that her leadership had inspired. Their willingness to follow her into any situation was based on proven competence rather than abstract qualifications, representing the kind of trust that defined effective military leadership. The enemy's tactical defeat during the rescue operation had strategic implications that extended beyond the immediate tactical success. Their failure to prevent the rescue had damaged their reputation among local populations who had been monitoring American military capabilities. The demonstration that American forces were willing and able to conduct successful operations despite enemy preparation had enhanced coalition credibility throughout the region. Sarah's legacy within the Marine Corps was established through her successful challenge to institutional assumptions about leadership, gender, and tactical innovation. Her actions had proven that the most effective military leadership combined technical competence with moral courage, tactical innovation with institutional loyalty, and personal sacrifice with professional dedication. The story of her rescue operation became part of Marine Corps' folklore, inspiring future generations of officers who would face similar challenges in their own careers. Her example demonstrated that true leadership required the courage to act when action was necessary, the wisdom to innovate when conventional approaches failed, and the moral strength to accept responsibility for decisions that saved lives. Years Later, when Sarah had achieved senior rank and was responsible for training the next generation of Marine officers, she would tell her students that leadership was not about following rules or maintaining procedures. It was about having the courage to make impossible decisions when lives were at stake, the wisdom to adapt when circumstances demanded innovation, and the moral strength to accept responsibility for the consequences of those decisions. The 12 Marines who had followed her into the darkness of the Peck Valley had learned that true leadership transcended rank, gender, and institutional politics. They had witnessed courage in its purest form, the willingness to risk everything for the welfare of others. That lesson would guide them throughout their military careers and would be passed on to future generations of Marines who would face their own moments of impossible choice. The vindication that Sarah had achieved through her actions was not institutional recognition or career advancement, but the knowledge that she had brought every single one of her Marines home alive. That accomplishment would define her legacy and inspire others to understand that the highest calling of military service was not obedience to authority, but loyalty to the principles that made such service meaningful in the first place. The tactical innovations that Sarah had developed during the rescue operation were incorporated into the Marine Corps' Small Unit Tactics Manual, providing future commanders with proven techniques for operating in complex environments where conventional approaches had proven inadequate. Her multi-directional infiltration methods, use of terrain masking, and psychological warfare techniques became standard subjects of study at the Marine Corps' War College, where senior officers analyzed her decisions and learned to apply similar principles in their own operational planning. The institutional changes that resulted from Sarah's actions extended far beyond individual recognition or career advancement. The Marine Corps revised its procedures for emergency rescue operations, creating new protocols that prioritized rapid response over bureaucratic authorization when American lives were at immediate risk. These changes, known informally as the Mitchell Protocols, gave field commanders greater latitude to make tactical decisions based on local conditions rather than distant headquarters approval. The investigation's findings led to broader reforms in military intelligence gathering and analysis, addressing the systematic failures that had contributed to the initial tactical disaster. New procedures were established for validating intelligence from multiple sources, cross-referencing enemy capabilities with historical patterns, and providing field commanders with more comprehensive threat assessments. These reforms prevented similar intelligence failures in subsequent operations throughout the theater. Colonel Brennan's command philosophy was subjected to intense scrutiny by military educators, who recognized that his rigid adherence to conventional procedures had nearly resulted in preventable casualties. His case became a cautionary tale taught at command schools, illustrating how institutional inflexibility could become a tactical liability when circumstances demanded adaptive leadership. The lessons learned from his failures influenced military doctrine about the balance between institutional discipline and tactical innovation. The psychological evaluation that had been conducted during Sarah's investigation became the basis for new research into leadership effectiveness under extreme stress. Dr. Morrison's findings about the relationship between moral courage and tactical decision-making influenced military psychology programs that trained officers to recognize and develop the mental qualities necessary for effective combat leadership. Her work contributed to selection criteria for advanced leadership positions that emphasized moral reasoning alongside tactical competence. The diplomatic implications of Sarah's rescue operation continued to resonate throughout the region long after the immediate tactical situation had been resolved. Local tribal leaders who had witnessed American willingness to risk additional personnel to save trapped Marines began to reassess their relationships with coalition forces. The demonstration of American commitment to protecting their own personnel influenced local perceptions of American reliability and resolve in ways that enhanced subsequent diplomatic and military cooperation. The enemy's tactical defeat during the rescue operation had strategic consequences that extended beyond the immediate tactical success. Their failure to prevent the rescue despite extensive preparation and superior positioning damaged their reputation among potential recruits and supporters who had been monitoring American military capabilities. The psychological impact of their defeat contributed to reduced enemy recruitment and increased local cooperation with coalition forces throughout the Peck Valley region. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's recovery from the wounds he had sustained during the initial ambush became a symbol of the rescue operation's success. His testimony about Sarah's leadership had been instrumental in the investigation's conclusions, but his personal gratitude transcended professional recognition. Years later, when he had achieved senior rank himself, Rodriguez would tell his own Marines that he owed his life to a commander who had been willing to risk everything to bring him home. The Marines who had volunteered to follow Sarah into the enemy-controlled territory formed a brotherhood that lasted throughout their military careers. Their shared experience of the rescue operation created bonds that transcended normal military relationships, uniting them through their participation in an operation that had demonstrated the highest principles of Marine Corps service. Many of them requested transfers to units where they could continue serving under Sarah's leadership, creating an informal network of officers and enlisted Marines who had been personally shaped by her example. Corporal Brooks, whose marksmanship had been crucial to the rescue operation's success, was promoted to sergeant and became an instructor at the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School. His teaching emphasized the psychological principles that Sarah had employed during the rescue, showing students how precision fire could be used to create tactical deception and psychological effects that exceeded the simple elimination of enemy personnel. His classes became some of the most popular at the school, drawing students who wanted to learn the techniques that had made the rescue operation possible. Lance Corporal Santos, who had maintained communications during the rescue operation, was selected for advanced training in electronic warfare and communication systems. Her experience with the frequency hopping techniques that had prevented enemy detection during the rescue led to innovations in field communication that were adopted throughout the Marine Corps. Her technical expertise, combined with her operational experience, made her a valuable contributor to the development of new communication systems designed for use in contested environments. The medical techniques that Staff Sergeant Collins had employed during the rescue operation were incorporated into combat medic training programs, providing future medical personnel with proven procedures for treating casualties under fire while conducting evacuation operations. Her experience became the basis for new training scenarios that taught medics to integrate casualty care with tactical operations, ensuring that wounded Marines could receive immediate treatment without compromising mission effectiveness. Strategic analysis that had emerged from the rescue operation influenced military planning throughout the theater, providing commanders with new insights into enemy capabilities and effective countermeasures. The intelligence that Sarah's team had gathered during their infiltration and rescue operation filled gaps in understanding that had existed since the beginning of coalition operations in the region. This information contributed to the planning of subsequent operations that achieved greater success with fewer casualties. The academic study of Sarah's leadership decisions became a standard component of military education, with her case being analyzed in leadership courses at military academies and staff colleges throughout the world. International military observers studied her tactical innovations and leadership techniques, incorporating her methods into their own training programs. Her example demonstrated that exceptional military leadership transcended national boundaries and cultural differences, inspiring military professionals in multiple countries to adopt similar approaches to complex operational challenges. The long-term impact of Sarah's actions extended beyond immediate military applications to influence broader discussions about women in combat roles, and the institutional barriers that had historically limited their opportunities for advancement. Her successful leadership under extreme conditions provided concrete evidence that gender was irrelevant to tactical competence and moral courage, influencing policy changes that opened additional combat positions to qualified female personnel. Years later, when Sarah had achieved senior rank and was responsible for training the next generation of Marine officers, she would tell her students that leadership was not about following rules or maintaining procedures. It was about having the courage to make impossible decisions when lives were at stake, the wisdom to adapt when circumstances demanded innovation, and the moral strength to accept responsibility for the consequences of those decisions. Her classes drew students from throughout the military who wanted to learn from someone who had proven these principles under the most demanding circumstances possible. The leadership principles that Sarah taught were based on her understanding that military service was fundamentally about protecting others, and that this responsibility transcended institutional politics, bureaucratic procedures, and personal advancement. Her students learned that true leadership required the courage to act when action was necessary, even when that action violated established procedures or challenged institutional authority. These lessons influenced a generation of military officers who would face their own moments of impossible choice and would be guided by the example that Sarah had set. The 12 Marines who had followed her into the darkness of the Peck Valley had learned that true leadership transcended rank, gender, and institutional politics. They had witnessed courage in its purest form, the willingness to risk everything for the welfare of others. That lesson would guide them throughout their military careers and would be passed on to future generations of Marines who would face their own moments of impossible choice. The memorial service that was held for the Marines who had died in the initial ambush became an annual tradition that honored their sacrifice while celebrating the rescue operation that had prevented additional casualties. Sarah's presence at these ceremonies reminded everyone that leadership was measured not by the ability to prevent all losses, but by the courage to act decisively when action could save lives. Her example demonstrated that the highest calling of military service was not perfect execution of predetermined plans, but the wisdom to adapt when circumstances demanded innovation and the moral strength to accept responsibility for the consequences of those decisions. The vindication that Sarah had achieved through her actions was not institutional recognition or career advancement, but the knowledge that she had brought every single one of her Marines home alive. That accomplishment would define her legacy and inspire others to understand that the highest calling of military service was not obedience to authority, but loyalty to the principles that made such service meaningful in the first place. Her story became proof that when others say you can't lead, when they question your strength, when they doubt your resolve, sometimes the most powerful response is not words, but action, the kind of action that saves lives and proves that true leadership knows no boundaries. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.